Welcome. I'm Larry Olsen, and what's on your mind? Once set, it delivers your life. To change the outcomes we want, we must change the plays we're running. Join us at Mindset Playbook with real people, real talk for real insight.
This episode is brought to you by our new NeuroEdge program. Join us for this groundbreaking accelerator where you'll receive on-demand training and live coaching with Larry. Transform your mind, elevate your team, achieve extraordinary results. NeuroEdge.
I want to welcome all of you to Mindset Playbook, where we examine our habits, attitudes, beliefs, and expectations that drive our behavior, as well as the plays or strategies we use that can either accelerate us forward or hold us back. And speaking about our plays, let's talk about plays that everyone's interested in, and that's for better health. About 74% of adults in the U.S. are overweight, according to the CDC, or the Center for Disease Control. That's 3 out of 4 of our listeners, including myself. And if you asked any of us, how many of us would like to stay overweight? The answer would probably be a big old 0. And since most diets don't work, what can we do about it that we haven't already tried? And why is it so important to our overall health? The good news is my guest today is here to answer that question and many more. Dr. Jessie Haymeyer is the physician founder of Well Empowered. Now think about that, where she practices heart-centered, data-driven functional medicine. She had one commitment in mind when creating her company, and that was providing you the foundation of health and vitality that allows you to fully bring your gift to the world. It's my pleasure to have her today and for all of us to gain insights into showing up as our healthiest self. Welcome, Dr. Jessie Haymeyer, to Mindset Playbook.
Thank you so much, Larry. It is a pleasure to be here with you and your community.
Oh, and we're glad you're here. Dr. Haymeyer, with the world saturated with how-tos on getting in shape, losing weight, etc., what can you share with us that would allow us to wake up and take a new look at moving forward towards vitality and better health?
Well, what I would start with in answering that question, Larry, is I would invite you and all of your listeners to contemplate a question and to really actually take a moment to put pen to paper. I do actually prefer pen to paper, but for those of you who haven't held a pen in a decade, fine, I will settle for fingers to keyboard. But the point is to actually engage in this exercise. And the exercise is asking yourself the question, what is my intention for my health? And what would fulfilling that intention make available for me, for others, maybe even for the world? Wow. I really believe one of the things that I've seen and working with people in the area of health and vitality for decades now is that question is a huge missing from the conversation. Right? If the number on the scale were that compelling, people would handle it. It's not that compelling, right? But when people get very clear on their intention for their health and how that shows up in all of life, you know, what they see about fulfilling that intention and where all the areas of life it would touch, the relationship with themselves, the relationship with others, what they're able to create in the world, it really changes the nature of the conversation entirely. It actually really transforms it, is what I'd say. So, that's one high level question. Now, if you want to really dig in deeply and get at another level, another layer of what that intention might be, I invite you to tell the story of you 5 years from now as you would be thriving. So, as you intend to be in this 5 year future where your health and vitality is, kind of what we might say handled, but really, you thriving in the area of your health and vitality. And tell that story in a particular way. Tell that story in first person present tense. So for me, the 5 year future is 52 years old. So I would say something about I'm 52 and my body is strong and resilient and full of vitality or whatever's there for me, right? So you want to really have this be your own expression of the 5 year future and what that looks like and what that feels like. What's it like to move about your day? What's it like to get dressed? What's it like to engage with other people? How is this showing up in your energy levels and your clarity of thought and, all of the things that are important to us?
Well, I have one word to share my feelings about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's sold.
So,
I don't know how much you know about me, but my book is called Get a Vision and Live It. And what
mhm.
you just did was absolutely profound in the sense that you didn't get into goals, you didn't get into numbers, you got into people imagining, and
Mhm.
which is a lost art for most. They're so busy. And yet you asked them really, you didn't want to know what their goal was. You wanted to know what their vision was. And what's so
Absolutely.
fascinating about that regarding our brain is that when you express it as though it's actually happening to you now, you take action on it. But when
Yes.
it's something I'm going to do, right? What am I
Right.
going to do in 5 years? What am I going to look like in 5 years? I got 5 years.
The 5 year time span never shortens, right? When we're going
Exactly.
to do it.
Exactly. That's just a beautiful beginning. And then what's even more powerful is you actually know what you're talking about. And tell us a little bit about what your fascination was in getting into functional medicine and getting into the elements of what our natural products and our plants and the things that are available to us, which were designed from a natural perspective to provide us with resolutions to particular challenges, as well as how to be even more vital and vivacious in our appetite towards life.
Yeah. Well, what's great is I love the word you use, fascination, because it really is a fascination for me. I mean, just an endless source of wonder and awe in, understanding at a new level always how our bodies work and how different bodies work. Right. And so for
Mm,
me, it really was born of my own journey and seeing, in my own struggles with weight. I struggled with weight for probably about a decade and a half. It was at the end of my 20s. I grew up dancing. And so, that was like my weight was very much on my mind. And at a certain point towards the end of my 20s, it was 2004, I really got to a point of being absolutely fed up with myself. And not fed up with myself in like a bad me kind of way. It wasn't like, I had plenty of, all of that decade and a half, spent plenty of time beating myself up, right? I got fed up with my life being so governed by my struggles in this area, right? My
uh,
relationship with food, what it felt like to get dressed in the morning and how my clothes fit, and then being out there in the world, either liking how they fit or how I looked or not, how that was really taking up so much headspace and so much heart space. And I really got like, my life's supposed to be about a lot more than this. And a bit of an aside, my mom was raised Catholic, my dad was raised Jewish, and we were raised brunch. So we joke we went out to brunch on the weekends. That's what we did.
It's
But
brunch.
yeah, so I share that in the context of, for me in that when I really got like my
So
life is
do you experience a little schizophrenia at Christmas?
right. Well, when growing up, we did a little bit of everything. We did Hanukkah, we did the Christmas tree. So we
Oh,
just did it
good,
all. It was
good,
lovely. Yeah,
good.
exactly. And really fun.
Yeah,
But yeah, so for me, when I drew the line in the sand, there was this moment of surrender in like, asking a higher power, whatever you want to call it, um, help, just simply
yeah.
put, help, right? If you'll help me navigate this area of my life, I promise to make my life about helping others navigate this area of their life for themselves. And
Gotcha.
so really, in that journey, I learned things scientifically, and then I also learned things about creating change and being pulled forward by a vision, right? Like you were speaking to. And so, in that, at some point, I really got, on the scientific part, I need to understand how different bodies work, not just my body, other bodies as well, because they are different. What works for me might not work for you. Right.
Mm.
And so I went to graduate school and got 2 graduate degrees fundamentally so that I could go out there in the world and be able to take a data driven approach to people and their health challenges and looking at what are the physiological barriers. And then also, how are we going to support healing, right? How are we going to get in there and create a foundation of health that allows you to thrive?
How would you like to wake up from the drudgeries and stresses of day-to-day life? If yes, Larry's ready to coach you as he has thousands on the proven step-by-step strategies where you'll break through limiting beliefs, elevate your confidence, and inspire others. To find out how, go to LarryOlsen.com. And now back to Larry and his guest.
Let me back you up because I'm very enchanted by this, by your story. You were walking down a path that was creating a lot of frustration in his life. It was all consuming.
Yeah.
And that was, how do I look and how much, do I weigh, blah, 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 blah. And I know a lot of people can relate to that. And then you came to a gap in the road, not a gap, but a Y in the road. And you made your decision by what you called surrendering. And everybody has an understanding of what surrender means. Share with us what that meant to you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in that moment, I would say a few different things as I contemplate that question. One is I stepped into not knowing, right?
Mm,
Before it
mm,
was like, well, I'll just find a new answer, right? I just have to try a different diet, right? That
yeah,
diet
okay.
didn't work. So I'll just, I stepped into surrender. I stepped into curiosity, which I think is, at least can only really exist with a sense of I don't know. Um, and also, I took on a level of the word I'm inclined to use, it's not exactly it, is ambition. It's maybe a better word would be like resilience and my commitment to navigate this area with self-love. So to step back and say a little bit more about
Uh,
that, I
okay.
really saw that, the decade and a half prior had been governed by what I like to call the all or nothing approach. And the all
Oh,
or nothing approach is really something is expressed as deprivation and overindulgence. So those are fundamentally the two options in the inherited approach to how we care for our bodies. It's either let's get ready for a marathon or let's just sit on the couch for 6 months, right? It's either do the whole 30 and dry January or whatever, or let's eat a pizza and drink a bottle of wine, right? Those are just expressions of overindulgence or deprivation, right?
yeah.
And the thing about that approach is fundamentally it doesn't work, right? People don't end up with the outcomes and able to sustain those outcomes. And they certainly don't feel great about themselves in the process. So that
Right.
all or nothing approach is born of self-aggression. So in that moment of surrender, there was part of me, although I wouldn't have been able to give words to it in that moment, that really got that what I had been doing was broken, and authoring a new era defined by journeying with self-love, that was going to be at least an important part of my North Star.
How do you get to the North Star of the journey to self-love when most people have gotten so used to self-abuse, to being a loser, to I just can't do it. I've tried and nothing's ever worked, and without knowing it, they lower their self-esteem. And I
Mm-hmm.
really believe self-esteem and performance are raise self-esteem, raise performance, lower self-esteem, lower performance. And performance is that outcome we're looking through the vision of asking ourselves, what's my intention? Which you've
Yes.
very wonderfully explained. You also mentioned, though, about depth, this overindulgence, you know, is it overindulgence versus deprivation? Is that what you said?
Yeah, overindulgence and deprivation, they're two different sides of the same coin that is self-aggression. So
And you
self-aggression
said
is the
born of self-aggression.
yeah, born of
What the heck
self-aggression.
does that mean to you?
It
Born of
means,
self-aggression.
you know, when people take on uh, a stance of deprivation, like the Whole30, maybe initially it's like, oh, they're so excited, right? Well, we'll get into the full loop of it, right? So
Okay.
maybe it starts off as not really feeling like beating yourself up, but at a certain point, right, the complete abstention, the drive, it's like perfection or failure. Those are the two options, right? um at a certain point, right, the people just, that's an unsustainable approach for 99% of the world, and the 1% that it is sustainable for, those we call those that disordered eating for most people, right? um and because it's unsustainable and people have this experience of deprivation and beating themselves into submission to sustain it until they can't, the until they can't is typically a backlash, right? Like a reaction to such severe deprivation where people are like, okay, I'm having the entire box of cookies because I haven't had anything for the last month, right? So it becomes this, and then that cycle, right? People get to a point where they have overindulged and then they physically feel crummy and they're also ashamed of themselves, right? Because it rarely do people experience being proud of themselves for having overindulged. Now, overindulgence is different than indulgence. So we want to acknowledge that. And so from overindulgence, they get catapulted back into deprivation. And so the cycle becomes, self perpetuating. And, I guess, you asked, how do you get to a place where you choose that route of self love? I would say for me, it was really a few things. One was confronting that what I was doing wasn't working. Like it wasn't working in any sense of the word, right? And and I think part of me just knew there had to be another solution. Like I don't know what it is. It's not even like I look around and see someone doing something that I can say like, "Hey, how are you doing that?" Like I didn't see it. I didn't know it. I just knew there had to be another solution. And so, I began that journey. I actually, at that time, I did author. And so you said vision, right? I call it now my vision of vitality. So what we walked through at the beginning is the beginning of the guidance provided of authoring your vision of vitality. So I did author my vision of vitality. I did author my intention for my health and my life. And I didn't just do it once, right? I did it and I created a ritual of connecting to my vision of vitality every single day, right? And I connected to it every day because I saw it made a difference for me. I saw it did become something that pulled me into that future. And it did become something where when I made mistakes, because you will, right? And anything big that you're up to, right? If you think about it, it's easy for
Well, you're
us to
moving
look
into
at,
the unknown. I mean,
yes,
you don't have an automatic reaction. Your amygdala
yes,
can't take over. I mean, there's all kinds of issues that come to play.
right, right. And it would be unrealistic to think that, okay, from that moment forward, I never overindulged again.
Yeah.
Right. I will say I was funny. I was thinking in the context of working with other people, it's like, I honestly can't remember the last time I overindulged. I can't, because to me now it's like such a gross, like even suggestion that I wouldn't do it to myself. Like I
Yeah,
just wouldn't, but
it's like moving from being a mean-spirited person to someone who's kind.
yeah,
You can't be sarcastic anymore and
right.
feel good
Yeah.
about it, right?
Yes. Right.
Let me
That's a good
back you
example.
up just a
Yeah.
sec, because
Hmm.
everything you're saying is just, you have such a wonderful way of taking complexity and being able to use words that create clarity. Very, very well done. You mentioned, and this is, I want to get your opinion on this because I think people have to be aware of this. You mentioned you authored it.
Yes.
Now, my understanding about authoring it was you wrote it down,
Yes.
maybe said it out loud,
Hmm.
but there's a theory that says, if you're going to quit smoking, tell everybody.
Mm.
Because then when you go to pick a smoke up, people are
Ah,
going to tell you.
yes.
My experience and my belief is that's a worst possible thing you can do. Because here's something that you're kind of moving from a have to a want to, and then you give it to other people. And when they go, well, I thought you weren't going to eat that any longer. Now it's a have to. Now you're being
Yes.
told what to do. So
Mhm.
where is, and I don't mean to lead the witness at all, but you seem to be a woman who has her own mind, which is outstanding. Not that you're a woman, but just anybody has their own mind. What are your thoughts about these people saying, "Oh, I'm so excited! I'm going to tell everybody I'm going on a diet. I'm going to author it and let them read it."
I completely agree with you, Larry. I really see people's journey in this area of their life as a very sacred journey. And to me, telling it to everyone else would be a little bit like sharing a love letter from my husband on social media. Like,
Okay.
oh,
Yeah.
that is so, it's sacred, right? It's no. So, absolutely not. I completely agree with you. It's really when you gain clarity on your intention in an area of your life where you've struggled and you're committed. Yes, you want to find people who you know are on your side. And yes, you might want to pull someone in who has the capacity to guide you. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But the to me, it really is, just very, very, very important to engage with this as your own sacred work, as your own sacred journey. And anyone who you invite to be a part of it, it is they're privileged, quite
Yeah.
frankly. And if
Yeah.
they don't treat it like that, then they're not the right person to be a part of it.
And that's why sometimes we have to go outside of our sphere of influence. We have to find someone, call you or whatever, and get someone who's created a safe space, doesn't expect perfection, and isn't going to find fault when we fall short, is going to look for avenues to help us lift us back up and get back on track again.
Yes,
And I also hear
absolutely.
you lose power too when you tell people what your aspirations are.
I think so. I mean, it definitely resonates with me, Larry. I mean, I feel like, they're not as much in this area of my life, although I'm sure I probably did at some point in my 20s. Um, but I can think about other areas of my life where I've like, maybe not screamed it from the rooftops, but overshared.
Yeah,
And it just
I've been
doesn't, it
accused of
does
that.
right, right. It doesn't turn out well, right? It does steal the power. It
Yeah.
does steal my power. Yeah. Hmm.
The other one you said, which I think anyone who's listening to this is going and is having any kind of an issue, is going through the self-love is more difficult than just saying I'm going to start loving myself. So please share with us um, what that means to you.
Yeah.
What is that whole concept? You remember that old adage, love thy neighbor like thyself? I mean,
Hmm.
it's not, it's biblical, but
Yeah.
my belief is most people do, and that's the problem.
Mm,
As
right.
we got to first start with loving ourselves, and we got to start there when we don't, because of focused on everything we've fallen short and how we've let ourselves down. So that being said, what does that mean to you, and what was your journey on that?
Yeah, it really, what comes to mind is this is bringing two things together that often don't coexist. And that is kindness and honesty, kindness and honesty, right? So if we're thinking about this area of life, most people choose one or the other, right? They're honest. Maybe they track their food or they track their workouts or they track their sleep. And then they beat themselves up when they fall short, which inevitably they do because they're human, right? Or they're kind and they just don't look, right? Like that's the only way
Oh,
they know to be kind. And so it took a lot of work to bring them both together. And also, kind of like along the way, creating for myself what I would now call standards of effectiveness. So, standards of effectiveness is really a way to meet ourselves where we are and be honest about what is a stretch, like an appropriate stretch, like something that's appropriately challenging, rather than insufficiently challenging. It's not really going to make a difference. That was never my tendency, so I didn't really have to worry too much about that. Versus, like over expecting way more than
all or
I my
nothing.
my capacity had shown. Right. So yeah. So if, for example, maybe in a moment around that time of my life, I might have said, oh my gosh, I was a total sugar addict, right? So I might have said, okay, um, at that point in my life, I thought that zone bars were a better choice. I'm like embarrassed to say that right now because they're like, I don't even know if they're still
Oh,
out there,
come
but
on, come on.
yeah, right. Okay. But at that point in my life, I do recall saying, okay, um, call it, maybe it was 3 nights a week, I'll have a zone bar as my dessert. And like, 2 nights I won't have anything, and 2 nights, but I came up with myself. I'm calling them standards of effectiveness, but we might say like what winning looked like for me in that moment, right? In that moment. Now, I did know along my journey that I was committed to not being owned by sugar. Sugar is the devil, period. So more addictive than cocaine, like studies have shown that, it's no like wonder people are addicted to sugar because, there are very smart food scientists creating the food you're addicted to.
Sure, absolutely.
So yeah. So, it was in my journey that I began to look at like, okay, what would be a better game that I really believe I could play and win, and also would be challenging. Like it would take intention and focus, and it's not going to be an easy win, but I could win it, right? And so I started to do that, right?
Mm.
Play, and then it would be okay. Maybe I'll have a zone bar 3 days a week, and I won't have anything else. So I would just move at my own pace. But this
So your
idea,
reward system or your dopamine dump would come from small steps, small accomplishments,
yeah,
as opposed to the reward you got from eating the food.
absolutely, absolutely, and also, that's very well said. And also in that process, just being in the where am I right now conversation, as opposed to where I think I quote unquote
What do
should
you?
be.
Let me ask you real quick, and my apologies for continuing to interrupt. My audience will probably hate me for this, but um, you're oh no, I lost it. It
That's
was
okay.
great though. But
If it
anyway,
comes back, yeah,
please
I'm sure it
continue.
will.
Yes, please continue.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. So it really, was being in this journey and continuing to evolve. I think about 1 year as one lap in the area of health. And
Okay.
so, there have been refinements over the years, right? Because I'm always learning more. I'm learning more about my health. I'm learning more about myself. I'm learning more about my body. And, science as a whole, there's always new research out there. So as more information becomes available, of course, I'm going to make shifts too that reflect the most up-to-date information we have, right? So it really does become a journey over time. And, to go back to 1 year being one lap, why I say that is I'll step back one more step back and say that nutrition is 80%, maybe even a little more, of weight mastery, right? And that is the most complicated area for most people to master in all of their life, right? And so that means, mastering how they self-soothe, how they use food to escape emotions, right? Kind of another way of saying self-soothing, maybe. Also navigating like the logistics of life. We travel a lot. Okay. So that means I need to be prepared and be thinking ahead about what are my nutritional solutions if that's important to me. And it is, right?
Yeah.
So it requires navigating what it is to be a social human being, where food is part of our socializing, right? And that's not a bad thing. It can be a really wonderful thing. I was talking to a woman earlier today who I was so excited for her. She had a last minute invitation from a neighbor to come over for a barbecue on Saturday. And within 20 minutes, she was like, I made a salad and brought veggies. I was so excited for her. Like, she wouldn't have done that a couple of months ago. Right.
Yeah.
And she's like, and everybody ate it. They loved it. She's like, I made this new Greek salad I'd never made before. What, so it's just to say, this is not an either or. Either I get to be social or I get to be healthy. Absolutely not. I would argue that you can't be healthy without being social. So there's
Yeah,
that.
and you triggered it for me on what I forgot on that
Mm-hmm.
social side. One of the things that's, somebody has this revelation, they have the intention, here's what I'm going to look like in 5 years. And they go ahead and start the process. But if you went into their kitchen, all of their supplies support the old vision, not the new one.
Yeah.
Everyone in their family is why aren't you having that? Why don't you want to eat that?
Yeah.
How do you keep the social element, which we are born to be social creatures, or we
Yes.
couldn't propagate the species? So
Yeah.
rejection is the number one fear of the human race. That comes into play now, the mental game of these people. So how do you go about making sure that that does not become a stumbling block,
Yeah.
and they have some way to navigate that?
Well, a few different ways. One is by acknowledging that perfection is a myth, right? And
Okay.
so, as opposed to this all or nothing approach, what I'm an advocate for is people authoring and mastering their middle ground. And that's really a process of discovering. So, middle ground is that not too tight, not too loose world. I mentioned earlier, there is a difference between overindulgence and indulgence, right? And so,
Okay.
there is room for making a choice that is not just like teeming with nutrients, and also it's going to depend how frequently you make that choice. And, how are you having one cookie or the box, like that,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
so that will impact how our health goes. Right. But in the way of, looking at how do we navigate those social settings, a few different things. One thing I encourage people to get tooled up with is a simple response when people get curious about your nutritional shifts, because they will. It's human nature, right? And one thing that I began saying, and this really points back to what you said, Larry, about you pointed to in the way of not putting getting out the megaphone and screaming to the world what you're doing, right? When people said, oh, why aren't you eating that? Or why are you doing this thing you didn't do before? Kind of a question. I would say, you know what? I feel so much better when I do this. I just noticed I feel better. And a few things about it, it was true. It actually was true. It made me feel better. And it also reminded me that it was about me, right? Because looking better is
Okay.
kind of at least partially about how other people are seeing you.
and
Yeah,
not
okay, you
and
want
not add to that. And you'd feel better too if you'd eat that way.
yeah, well
Because there's a
maybe.
tendency when people, you know, start finding out about nutrition, they've immediately become a nutritionist, and now they tell other people, "Do you know how many calories that is?"
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Right?
that's another conversation. But
Yeah, yeah,
I
for
I
sure.
really, people, it's so funny. Like every once in a while I'll most, people in my life know what I do, right? So there will be times where I'm going out to dinner and people are like, "I'll just do what you're doing." Because I know they're nervous to like order themselves. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like I have zero judgment about your choices. I'm making choices that allow
Yeah,
me to fulfill my intention for my health." And
yeah. Which is
I
why
wish,
that's such a great comment. It makes me feel
yeah,
better. Yeah,
yeah, it makes me feel better, period. I
yeah,
notice this makes me feel better. And the cool
yeah.
thing about that is like, when it becomes that, who's going to give you pushback? "Oh no, you should eat that thing that doesn't make you feel well." Like, that's
Right.
weird. Who's going to say that? Right.
Yeah.
And then also, a nice little side effect is people actually might get curious. "Oh, it made you feel better. I wonder if it would make me feel better." Right. And when people, it's just kind of like it's that's a spiral up benefit is what I'd say is when other
The
people
spiral
start
of
to
what?
be spiral up benefit is
Spiral
when
up
you're,
benefit.
like the people who you're around start to get curious and start to be influenced by the choices you're making. Like that's pretty cool.
That's a beautiful thing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's when our mirror neurons really are helpful because we're now
Yeah.
providing a healthy model as opposed to,
Yeah,
and some people have to expect that some people may not want to play with you any longer.
absolutely. Absolutely. And that might be the price you pay. And also, it might be painful for a moment, but I suspect in the long run, the benefits will probably outweigh the
Yeah.
downsides.
Yeah. You know, I I would love to keep going, and I've got a zillion more questions, and we really even haven't given you the opportunity to kind of get into the nutrition side. But I think when you mentioned that we each have our own path, we're each different as we are genetically and from our blueprint. Nobody is the same, and I love that approach. I like the approach that you want to start out with a phone call and you want to find out about this person and be able to lead them on something that they can maintain and that they can feel good about. And it's, 1 year's a lap. It's not 30 days and you're going to lose 30 pounds because you'll put back on 40. And now you've gained weight on that lose weight in 30 days. Or you're addicted now to the pill that happens to be doing a number on your fat, which we don't know how healthy it is because it just came out. We haven't had 10, 15, 20-year studies. But for those out there that may be may have realized that, holy cow, I've fallen in love with food and I don't like what I look like any longer. It doesn't make me feel good about myself anymore. What would you share with them that get into their head a little bit that might be kind of a baby step? Because they've certainly probably done the all or nothing.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
and and then one other thing,
yes,
and then let them know how to go about reaching out to you
sure.
because I think you've sold us all on here's someone who will go your way with answering the questions that'll assist you in sustaining it. So it's all yours.
Well, thank you. And what I would say is if let's talk about, nutrition, things that starting is helpful, like things that you consuming is helpful, and things that reducing, right? So there's what we could increase and there's what we could decrease. Those are two different levers we could pull to improve, to impact our health and to move us towards fulfilling our intention. So, if we think about what we could start incorporating into our nutritional habits, I think most people in the world know that vegetables are full of nutrients, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, antioxidants, all kinds of wonderful things. So perhaps this is the area you might look at, bringing more colorful vegetables with an emphasis on the deep greens into your life. So if that resonates as something that would, gosh, I haven't seen a vegetable on my plate for the last 3 days or the last week or the last month, whatever it might be, that would be a great place to start. So if that's true for you, my encouragement is to get very clear for yourself, what is my standard of effectiveness? Right. And so your standard of effectiveness might be, I'm going to have some vegetable. So maybe you're even starting by not being specific about what kind of vegetable. Just as a little aside, white potatoes don't count. Some vegetable on my plate at least once a day, right? So that might be where I start. Or maybe you have a little bit more, maybe you do eat vegetables with some regularity, but you see you could either increase the quantity, or maybe you have it once a day and you see, okay, yeah, twice a day, I could get that in twice a day. So playing that game with, if we just look at vegetables, that would be a great point of leverage. I call that the yes. Yes, let's do that. Right. And then in the less category, I'm going to give you two. Oh gosh, it's so hard to choose. Two places to consider. Right. So again, just acknowledging every single one of you is at a different place in the area of your health and how you are regularly fueling your body. And number one is sugar, right? I mentioned sugar. And so where you might begin with that is by simply calculating your grams of sugar anytime you eat something that has sugar in it. Now, that doesn't mean you don't eat it. The first step, like I mentioned in the context of being kind and honest, is actually just getting present to what am I doing? I'm not even sure how many grams of sugar I'm having in a day. Perfect. That's a perfect place to start. Let's get curious. Let's start to have you every time you eat something with sugar, one cookie has 5 grams of sugar. I'm having 3 cookies, 15 grams of sugar. That's how much I'm having. Just as a heads up, what I love is when people cap those grams of sugar at 9 max in any one sitting. So just a little nutritional gem to kind of think about. But
9
again,
per sitting.
Yeah, 9 grams max per sitting. And it's not like, oh, great, I get 9 grams of sugar every time I sit down. It's just, no. If you're having something with sugar, you want to, that's where you want to head towards. It may not be where you start, it's where you want to head towards. And then similarly, because they have the same impact on our body, it's that simple carb world, right? It's the bread and the bagels and the white potatoes and the rice and the pasta. All of those things, even though they don't taste sweet at all, have the same impact on blood sugar as does, sweet tasting sugars. So you might be looking at how many times in a day am I having those things? How many times in a week? And beginning to reduce that.
Right.
So,
and how do we get in hold of you? How do we
yes.
reach out to you?
Yeah. So how you can get a hold of me is at wellempowered.com. You can, if you're curious about what it would look like to work together, please schedule a complimentary consultation. Be sure you let me know where you found me, because if you're sent by Larry, you will be gifted with 10% off a health audit, a 3-session health audit.
Oh,
And yes.
thank
And
you.
also, my pleasure. If you are someone who would like to kind of just dip your toes in the water and learn a little bit more, we send out weekly dares. So they're weekly dares that are micro habits. So just tiny little shifts. And we send those out on Sundays, a little email. And if that's of interest to you, please text 312 967 8000, 312 967 8000. You'll text Dare Me and share your email address, and we'll get you on that list.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. I learned a lot, and I think, like most of us, words trigger pictures, which bring about emotion that causes us to take some form of action. Either we do nothing or we do everything. And you're getting us into finding out and getting back to curiosity. And I couldn't help but go through my routine. And the first thing I thought of is, geez, I can just have one dessert with 27 grams. And then I go, no, Larry, let's take baby steps. Let's not.
Yeah.
But I think
Mhm.
what you're saying is work the numbers to your advantage, not to continue to play as you used to play. Break it up a little bit, because you really nailed it when you shared with all of us. We already know what we know, and it's not what we know that holds us back, but thinking we do that does. And so you're talking about moving into a new knowing. And I just think that's fantastic. I think we can't do that if we're not attempting something that's different than what we usually do. And we need to do that if we expect different outcomes. You,
Absolutely. Our actions right now are a perfect fit for our outcomes.
yeah. And do we like the outcome? I mean,
Yeah.
is that our vision? Is that what you've asked us to take the time to ask ourselves? What's my intention? And I think that's just an excellent question, because now I don't have to make a choice be which diet or pill I'm going to take. I need to ask myself, what is it I can consume now that allows me to fulfill and manifest vision? And that's a choice every time I'm about to put something in my mouth. Is it going to support the old vision, or is it going to support the new one? And you've been delightful in what you've offered, nugget after nugget. I'm so grateful that we had the opportunity to meet personally, to meet you, and to have the audience meet you as well. So
Thank you very much, Larry. It's been such a treat to be with you, and you're doing great work. And I know your listeners are of the same growth mindset, and it's a pleasure to be with you all.
well, thank you. And for all of you out there, I thank you. You had a ton of choices too as to what you wanted to invest your mind in, and we thank you for investing it with us. And once again, remember, wherever you are is exactly where you need to be to make the choice. And once you have that vision and that intention, you'll make the choice that allow you to manifest and fulfill that life that maybe was once a dream, and now you're making it a reality. So thank you, Doctor. It's been a pleasure. And thank all of you. And stay tuned, and you'll hear who we're going to have the opportunity to share with in the next time. All the best. Take care.
Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, we ask that you please subscribe and share with your friends and associates. Let's talk about what it truly means to take a break from life and come back renewed, refreshed, with a whole new mindset. In our next podcast, Larry's guest, Max Schneider, was such a successful businessman that he burned himself out to the point where he was having anxiety attacks and felt like a shell of his former self. To help untangle his brain, Max and his wife took a month-long, life-changing surf and yoga trip to Costa Rica. As soon as he returned, Max was inspired to create this type of experience for other high-achieving professionals. And through mindfulness retreats and mindfulness offsites, Max helps high-achieving professionals connect with themselves and others in profound and meaningful ways. Looking to take your life to the next level? Tune in and find out how.